Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Scott Pansky, the author of Playing Together in the Sandbox, which is capturing the hearts of children and parents and college students, well, every day. We're excited to learn a little bit more about the journey behind the story. And Scott, if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience here.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Scott Pansky. I am the author of Playing Together in the Sandbox. It's my first children's book. Just brief background, I've got 32 years of working in public relations and marketing with a company called Allison Worldwide. I am the father of three beautiful girls and happily married for 29 years.
Great. Well, Scott, it's a pleasure to have you here. Got a number of questions that I'd like to go through just to, again, introduce ourselves and introduce our audience to you, to your book, really the concept behind it. So, guess I'll go ahead and get right into it. If you don't mind sharing what inspired you to write the book.
I've always enjoyed working with kids from coaching soccer, playing little league. And as I mentioned, I have three daughters. And there's a book I read a long time ago that was, I think many of your viewers might have seen, was The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein.
Sure.
And my mom passed away about 11 years ago. And we were in the hospital. My youngest daughter called me up and we weren't ready to tell them yet. And she said, Dad, how are you? And I'm okay. How's grandma? She's okay. Dad, can I read you a story? I said, what? She said, I want to read you a story. And out of all the books she read The Giving Tree. And
Wow.
I'd read that book to her a ton of times, but I never understood the meaning until that day. And as you remember, as the tree gave the boy the branches and the apples and the trunk, that every single time when the tree was done, the tree was happy. And I realized by reading that book that my mom had given me everything she could, and she was happy. And that helped me deal with that. And I started thinking about a narrative around how we could help children play nice in a sandbox, and that there are adults that don't play nice in the sandbox. And if they didn't play nice as an adult, maybe they weren't playing nice when they were a kid. So if I could tell a story that would be accessible to kids and their parents, maybe everybody will start playing nice in the sandbox.
It's fascinating. And it's crazy to me that your daughter had the presence of mind to ask to read that story to you of all the selections. What do you think it was that gravitated her towards the Giving Tree?
I am not overly spiritual, but I swear my mom somehow got inside of her, and as she was looking at her book, said, "Hey, you need to read this to your dad." It's something that was there. It's interesting. A year later, my older daughter wrote a story. It was Thanksgiving, and the whole family was together. And she wrote this story, and that it was my wife read it and said, "You need to talk to your daughter. You need to read this story." And I said, "What? Come here now, read this story." So I read this story, and it was a story about which my mom had been watching over everybody all year and was so glad that everybody was together and she was okay to leave.
Wow.
And this is the mouth of children and how they process things. So I feel somehow that there is a spirit. I can't explain it. Like I said, I'm not overly religious, but it is important, and I think that's part of the family bond.
Wow, that's special. So impressive too. So, as far as like writing this book, I know before we started recording, you had mentioned that you've written other content before, other books before. Can you describe sort of your writing process as it relates to your other works and really as far as it relates to this title?
So I've worked on a mentorship book for the last 20 years or so. I've spent a lot of time working with college students. I taught at UCLA for 18 years, teaching sponsorship and cause-related marketing, and that I always wanted to write a book. And I started thinking about mentors and how I got to be able to do what I'm doing today. And I reflected that it was my parents, family members. I started thinking about bosses, bad bosses, coaches in sports that I had, teachers that had a lot of impact on my life, religious leaders, and thinking even pop culture. You know, I'm a kid from the 70s and I'm like listening to Star Trek and $6 Million Man and lessons in life that I could pick up from those types of shows. And so I wrote a book, and it was a long book, and the title was Lessons from Playing in the Sandbox. Because I've always said on my own is that I love playing in the sandbox because I get to meet new friends and I get to meet new clients, and those are like the new toys that I get to play with, and that they can last a lifetime. So as I was writing all this book together, I had my youngest daughter put together an image for me a sandbox, and looks very much like the image on the back of the book.
Hmm.
And we use that content to break up the copy. And at the end of each story, when we put the sandbox, we had a lesson learned in that part of life. And when that book was done, I felt so rewarded. It was amazing that I could really understand A, that I could write a book, and B, what legacy was. My telling stories of other people, I was their legacy. I'm keeping their memories alive. There's many people who had worked with me when I was doing my research, they had passed away. And I know this might sound morbid, but I was reading their obituaries, and their obituaries were amazing, the things that they had done and what they had accomplished in life. When I was talking to relatives and they were telling me other stories about their family members, it's like, wow. And I felt so fortunate to have them in my life. So when I was done writing that book, I was so motivated, and I got back and I was like, all right, I'm ready to dive in. And I realized when I got back to work that life had moved on still, and that there were people who weren't playing nice in the sandbox. And it's like, wait, if they don't play nice in the sandbox today, maybe they didn't play nice when they were a child.
Uh-huh.
So let me see if I can take the lessons learned from the bigger book and apply those to children, and then create playing together in the sandbox to help reach the young audience. Well, maybe also like a Shel Silverstein book, help reach the larger adult audience as well.
Gotcha. Very cool. And I think as we talk about the book, the thing that really sort of resonates with me is that the world is just a giant sandbox, right? And whether we're talking about you being an adult and playing in the sandbox, or you being a 5-year-old and playing in it for the first time, everyone's got their version of playing in the sandbox. And to your point, everyone should play nicely, but sometimes they don't.
And I think if we can learn that, you know, when I've worked with adults in this book, I've done some training with college students. And what I found is there were a lot of college students, and maybe COVID played a role in all of this as well, that they weren't inspired to share, that they had been beaten up. They didn't necessarily fit in well in a crowd. And I started thinking, you know, think about when you were 5 years old and you were playing in a sandbox. Nobody had stopped you from doing anything. You could be an actor, you could be a cowboy, you could be a doctor, you could do anything you wanted when you played in the sandbox. So, what's stopping you today from playing in the sandbox? And spend time just reminding them the fun things that you can do. And today, you know, I'll ask people to use crayons in my workshop, and bring them back and do exercises that can be a lot of fun. One that I took from another speaker that I really liked, a gentleman named Duncan Wardell, used to work at Disney. And he does an exercise where he'll ask everybody, and I'll do this with your audience, is take 7 seconds and draw a picture of a house and stop. And your 7 seconds go by, and most people will draw a square box with a triangle at the
Sure.
top and a little door. And if there's enough time, there's a second window or a chimney with some smoke or a little path and a tree.
Hmm.
Where did we learn how to do that? We learned how to do that when we were a little kid. And why are we all drawing the same sandbox? Because that's what we were taught. But on the other side, I've done this workshop where all of a sudden people have drawn pictures of castles or of dog houses.
Wow.
So they're doing something that's unique.
Hmm.
And that's where we can get real creative, because we don't have to stay within the lines.
Very
At least
cool. Yeah, yeah, big Phillies fan from Philadelphia. Actually, not too far from the ballpark here. Soon, I've actually got a book that I've been reading. Not to make this too much about me, but it's called Doc about Roy Halladay, great
Oh,
Phillies
yeah.
pitcher from I guess the 2011 season. So awesome book. But anyway,
Hey, I'll share one other story, whether it stays here or not. I started my career in public relations because of an interview with a former Philly player, Pete Rose.
okay, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Pete Rose, for good or
So
for bad.
good or bad. So Pete was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, had just set a record in major league hits, which still stands to this day.
Hmm.
I was a student at a junior college, and I had a teacher that inspired me. And I realized for the first time that writing was subjective. Some people will love this book, others may not. Hopefully, it appeals to a large audience.
Hmm.
So when I learned that writing was subjective, I started writing papers that I thought my teacher would enjoy. And he loved sports. So I said, I'm going to do an interview with Pete Rose. So I called up the Cincinnati Reds. They said, no, you need to talk to Pete's PR person. So I talked to Pete's PR person. He said no. I don't know anything about PR, don't understand PR.
Uh,
And there's PR people. So I called the San Diego Padres because the Reds were coming to town to play the Padres. And you may remember who the coach of the Padres was at the time, another former Philadelphia Philly, Larry Boa.
sure.
And so the Padres turned me down. So then I called up all the local TV stations, newspapers, and radio stations to see if I could shadow a reporter. And they all turned me down. And it turned out I knew one of the players on the Reds because he used to live in the Bay Area. I used to coach his nephew in Little League. And so then I met him after a game, started talking. He said, yeah, come by and have breakfast with me. And I knocked on his door and he wasn't there. And I started to go down the stairs. And who do I run into but Pete Rose?
Oh wow.
And I said, excuse me, Mr. Rose, I've been trying to get an interview with you for the last month. Could I get a few minutes of your time? And he looked at me and he walked away. And I said, Mr. Rose, just another minute.
Uh,
And he says, every Tom, Dick, and Harry can get a press pass, go get a press pass. And
well,
he leaves to sit down and have breakfast. So I followed him to breakfast. And I said, Mr. Rose, if I can just get 5 minutes of your time. And he said, I'm eating breakfast. Okay. So then I go back to the Padres front office. I've got nothing to lose because he told me to get a press pass. Pete Rose told me to get a press pass.
mhm.
So I got through to the head of PR, a wonderful gentleman named Bill Beck. And I hadn't gotten him the first time I had gotten an assistant. So he says, I understand you want to talk with me. And I tell him my story. He says, let me talk to Pete's PR person. If he says, okay, I'll give you a press pass. So he came back a few minutes later and had a press pass in his hand. And I said, did you talk to Pete's PR person? He says, no, but I admire your determination. Get what you need and leave. So I went onto the field. The first person I interviewed was Larry Boa.
Uh,
And Larry said that Pete was the candle that sparked the team to winning the World Series when
yep.
they won
Hmm.
their series. Then Pete came out and he's talking to Larry behind the backstop. And I go up to him and he looks at me and I said, I did what you told me to do. And 15 minutes later, he and I were sitting down talking
Wow.
and I did my first official interview, and that was with Pete Rose. I got an A in the class, and that started me down my career in public relations and in writing. So, I guess I should give Pete a little bit of credit for even in the children's book.
Hey, he's the reason we're here today. So I guess as we talk about the writing process a little bit more, were there any challenges or like writer's block? Was there anything like that as you were going through writing this book? And if so, how'd you overcome it?
It's interesting. I didn't have one. I'll talk about one evolution of the story, though, is that, as I mentioned, I wrote the adult book first, Lessons Learned from Playing in the Sandbox. So when I had that finished and had the epiphany for the children's version, it took me like 4 hours to write the book. And then I gave it to Book Baby to edit, and they tightened it up a little bit. And it was funny. One of the comments was, I think this book has strong potential, but it's hard to tell without the artwork. And then I
Sure.
submitted the artwork later and said, oh, this makes perfect sense to how this works because you really need the art to help tell the story. When I was working with the artist, though, and he showed me artwork, one of the things I had asked for in the book was one color. So in this case, you see the red ball behind me. He had shown me several images. One was some kids playing catch with a red ball. He had colored in the red ball. And then I said, all right, we got red for this page. What color are we going to put on the next page? And he said, I don't see another color. It's got to be the same color throughout the entire book. So then I went through the art again and I was saying, all right, how do we do this? Because I don't want to highlight different things on different pages. It doesn't seem to make sense.
Mhm.
And then there's like, light bulb went off. And I had him redo the last page and I changed the narrative of the story just a little bit. The story itself stayed consistent, but what we did is we added the red ball to every page except for the page where a recess bell goes off. Even in the windows in the classroom, you'll see a little red ball. This red ball floats throughout the entire book, and we never explained to anybody why the red ball is there until the last page. And what happens is, as the narrative talks about all the different ways you can play nice in the sandbox, the last picture that I commissioned was an image of all the kids together holding the red ball, and the red ball had brought them together to help tell the story and showing that the world was their playground and they could do anything they wanted to do, and inviting the readers to play in the sandbox too.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. Again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. The thing I take away from this is that the world is really just our sandbox. And we have to take care of everyone that's in it and be kind to them. Certainly, some people did not experience the kindness in the sandbox, but hopefully, as people take this book, they read it, that is their biggest takeaway.
I think so. And if you look back through time, is want everybody to understand about relationships. Relationships are cousins, family, people that you've met in elementary school who I can still stay in touch with, junior high, college. I had a high school friend of mine that recently passed away, and we had a reunion of people that we hadn't seen in years, but just through LinkedIn and other resources. And you picked up those friendships right away. When I was doing research for the book, and I was calling former bosses and former teachers, some remembered me, some didn't. I was trying to track down Bill Beck from the Padres for years, and I left a message with the Florida Marlins, who I'd seen online that he had done some consulting work with. And he called me back a few days later and he said, Scott, I understand you're trying to find me. And I said, Yes, Bill, I don't know if you remember me. And he said, Absolutely, I do. I said, Why? He said, You're one of only two people that I ever issued a press pass to that didn't have press credentials. And I was flattered. And now Bill and I kind of talk to each other every 6 months or so. So
Wow.
it's these relationships can last. At my work, I have clients, I have vendors, I have partners that are years and years long, that some have attended my wedding, kids bat mitzvahs. I mean, like lots of different things that we were able to share together.
Wow. That's great. Cool. So I guess the question that I have is we sort of talk about the students in the book. Um, how did you develop sort of the concept of these students? Were they based off of real people or were they just people that you came up with? Just describe that a little bit.
As you saw, there's really no one protagonist. And I'm excited that moving forward with the book, I actually now envision a series in which I can pull students out as the protagonist of their own book and share their story with other people. But it all their lessons started in the sandbox. But to your question, I'll share a couple things. Number one, when working with the artist, I said I wanted a diverse group of students who were going to be playing together. Didn't matter color, race, ability. I wanted somebody to be representation of different diversity so that anybody who read the book could potentially see themselves in the story. I thought that was important. There's only a few names in the book. One was Henry, spelled with an I. Henry Bollinger in real life was a mentor to me who passed away during COVID from a brain aneurysm, but he helped me get a teaching gig at UCLA. He helped me lead a nonprofit organization called the Entertainment Publicist Professional Society. And when we first moved to Los Angeles, he had adopted my family and we spent holidays together. So this was a way to honor him.
Mm.
Then there's a boy named David. And we had a gentleman that worked for us. His name was David Wolf. He was a mentor to everybody. We just all loved him. He was a scout, and we created a scholarship with the Boy Scouts to provide kids who didn't have the ability to pay for their fees and dues to become a scout. Also, under Henry, we've created a scholarship at UCLA for students who wanted to study entertainment marketing because Henry was a very famous entertainment publicist. So I thought these were nice ways to give back, but I wanted to honor them by including their names in the book. Then a few other names pop up, which are the name of my kids to do that. But as I write sequels, I plan on including other people as well.
Sure. So the other people, like the other named characters, are you picturing them as other mentors in your life?
Either mentors or family members who had a lot of meaning in my life that I think like it talked about legacy, that I feel it's important to recognize them. I've had so much luck and support from folks that I really do want to honor them.
Great. Okay, awesome. So I guess another question that I have, we talked about this a little bit before we actually started recording the interview, but if you don't mind sharing your favorite part of the book and why.
Ah, gosh, you're setting me up. So there's a lot of images in this book, and as I mentioned, there's the red ball. My favorite page in the book is this one right here, and that you'll see that there's a boy on a horse with a girl on the horse, and you see the wheelchair
Hmm.
beside them. This young lady didn't have a name, and that I just wanted kids of all ability to be represented and seen as normal. They could do anything that we can do. They just may have a harder time getting on the horse or not getting a wheelchair into the sand. There's different obstructions, and so as we look at playgrounds that are becoming more ADA compliant, that was important. That I always loved that image because it was inclusion. And I think that was really, really important. A side story to this, something I shared with Avery earlier, was I was speaking at an event and a woman named Sarah came up to me in a wheelchair. And as we started chatting, I found out that she had cerebral palsy. And as we continued to talk, she had told me that she had never seen herself in a presentation before. And that image was her. And I was so touched. Sarah and I have stayed in touch, and I plan on writing a sequel with Sarah, talking about people of all different abilities and how they play in the sandbox.
Very cool. It's very powerful too, just the story of Sarah. And I think I had mentioned this before we started recording as well, Scott, but I really look forward to hearing Sarah's story.
I look forward to sharing it soon.
Awesome. Cool. So yeah, I guess we talked a little bit about Shel Silverstein and how much of an impact he's had on you as a writer. Can you kind of delve into that a little bit more?
Yeah, Shell's artwork has always caught my attention, but there was a personal story that was attached with Shell. That 11 years ago, my mom passed away. And my wife and I were discussing how do we share this with our kids? And we weren't prepared to do that. And I had agreed that I would fly home and share the news with the kids and fly back. And a few minutes later, my wife's cell phone rang and she said, "It's the family and I can't talk to them." I said, "Okay, if it's important, they'll call me." And a few minutes later, my phone rang and it was my 9-year-old. And she said, "Dad, how are you?" And I said, "I'm good." She says, "How's grandma?" I said, "She's good." "Daddy, can I read you a book?" I said, "What?" She says, "I want to read you a book." And out of all the books she chose to read, she chose The Giving Tree. You know, The Giving Tree. Started thinking about it, and I told my wife, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I can't hear that." So I stepped out in the hallway, and she started reading the book to me. Now I had read this book. She's got hundreds of books, and I'd read this book to her numerous times, but I never heard it, never saw the message. And for those who haven't read the book, I'm sorry, I'm giving away a spoiler, but it's a story about a little boy in a tree. And as the boy grows up, the boy wants to start his life. And the first thing the tree does is give away her apples so that he can make some money. Then she gives away her branches so he can build a house. And then her trunk so that he can build a boat and travel. At the end, he's an old man, and the tree has nothing left to give. And he says, "I just want to sit on the stump." And that's how the story ended. But what the hook was, every single time the tree gave something of herself to the boy, there was a sentence that said, "And the tree was happy." And for me, when I heard this story at that time, I realized my mom gave me everything she could, and she was happy. And that helped me get through her death at that time. And it was just kind of a miracle. I looked at it and I realized that these books can really help educate people in different ways. We all process things differently. And so I will never read The Giving Tree the same way that I had prior to that moment. And it really inspired me. And so when I look at playing together in the sandbox, is all right, if I can help one or two adults play nicer because they read the story to their child, or a child grew up and really was nice all the time, I might have made a difference. I helped somebody. And if I help five people, that's great. If I help 50 people, better. If I help 500 people, even more. But I'm hopeful.
This fascinating too. As I was flipping through the pages, I did notice right away the influence and really your writing, but also the illustrations. They looked a lot like some Shelfer Silverstein books that I had seen when I was younger. So to your point, the influence really does show in what you've come up with here.
And I give a lot of credit to Book Baby for this. That I wrote the script, and obviously I found an artist that could bring those images together, and I showed him samples of Shell's work and others that had inspired me. But when I turned over the book to Book Baby and told them that I was inspired by Shel Silverstein, they actually went in and created different elements that would help it look like a Shel Silverstein book. And I'll show one of those here because I was really so impressed with how they did it. So here I was talking about my mentor, Henry, on a swing, and go higher, and you see how the font gets larger in the image.
Very
And
cool.
that to me was just like what the Shel Silverstein book was. I was actually kind of scared, like, am I violating any licenses of any kind? And I was told we had not. So I felt good about that.
Yeah, a little creative freedom never hurt anyone.
Exactly.
So, Scott, is there anything currently on your nightstand? Any books that you're currently reading? I know I shared mine, so I'm curious if you have anything.
I'm a big pop culture dork, so it's going to sound weird. I've got plenty of business books that I need to catch up on, but I still love like reading comic books. And every week I'll go to a comic book store, pick up some comics from a store called Collector's Paradise, which they actually is the only retailer outside of Book Baby and Amazon that are selling the book at their store. They want to help their customer. So they put the book out there, which was very generous of them. But I really try to stay up on pop culture through comics. There's so many different genres of comic books that are reaching a lot of people. And that how many comic books have you seen that are turned into movies and television shows? More than just the superhero books and things of that nature. So you'll catch me with this week's supply of comics from Captain America
Wow,
and Superman or Spider-Man, but a lot of other books as well.
cool, very cool. Yeah, appreciate the. I can kind of see the influence in the illustrations and from just comic books that you've read as well. Did you share any sort of like comics, anything along those lines with your illustrator as you were drafting the book?
I did.
Gonna say I could tell.
Actually, I did. There's a lot of different folks that have influenced kind of how I saw the book coming together. And so I wanted to be able to do that.
Awesome. You did a great job.
Thank you.
But, do you have any advice or any insight to share with aspiring writers and authors?
Yeah, I do. When I look at starting to write a children's book, that there's probably a lot of people who wanted to write a book and just never completed it. And when I first had this concept, I reached out to BookBaby. I was actually referred to BookBaby from a friend of mine who used to work at Barnes and Noble. And so I got on a call and said, "Hey, I'm trying to write this children's book. What is your process? How does it work?" And so they walked me through it, but I was kind of a technophobe and waited another month, a second month, still not sure what to do. I called again, and the first thing they said is, "All right, why don't you just upload your artwork?" So, yeah, it's an electronic file. Oh, it's real easy. Just upload it. So I went through the process. They walked me through it, and next thing you know, I had an outline for a book. The advice and counsel I provide, though, especially as a marketer, it's kind of like somebody was it cobblers, the elves and the cobblers' shoes, where they make shoes for everybody else, but they didn't make shoes for themselves.
Uh-huh.
As a marketer, I didn't have a full-fledged marketing plan in advance for the book. So I knew that when I finished the book in September of 23, that I was going to speak at a conference to 500 college students in Nashville. And I had the books printed so I could give every student a copy of the book because I really wanted to inspire them to network and meet other professionals and not be afraid. So this is going to be great. The book's going to help do that. So now the book is listed on Amazon, it's listed on BookBaby, but nobody's buying the book because nobody knows the book exists. I didn't have a full-fledged marketing plan. I had not paid for the advertising plan that BookBaby had provided. I still have to use those dollars that come with that. But I ended up working with University of Fullerton, the Cal State Fullerton, with a student group, and they created URLs on TikTok and Instagram to help promote the book. And then I've got a QR code that I use to have people, if they're interested, that they can get information on the book, and
Yep.
includes an activity book and bookmarks and other things to support the book. And now over the next year, we'll be doing a better job of trying to let the folks know the book is out there. The students help me get reading opportunities at different classrooms. And so really, long story made short, is if you're watching this, write a marketing plan in advance. Try and get out there 4 to 6 months before the book comes out. Create a demand for your book. That'll get more pickup and more sites promoting what you're doing. Without the demand, it's basically going to be a print on order type of program. So I encourage you, create that plan, tell your friends, have your friends promote this, use your existing social channels, and put out as much as you can about what you're trying to do, why you're doing it, so that you can get the exposure you need so you can create some sales.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because something that we deal with at Book Baby often is authors write great books, beautiful cover design, terrific metadata, all the bells and whistles to set themselves up for success. But the marketing is so vital. And I think the thing that people tend to sort of gloss over, so much marketing is just word of mouth. Just really tell a friend to tell a friend to tell another friend, right? Just
Yep.
make a couple posts on social. Just go out to your local bookstore, see if you can get a speaking engagement, a book signing there. And you'd be surprised just how much traction you can gain. Certainly, it's important to make sure that the book is on Amazon, is on Barnes Noble, really anywhere books are sold. But a lot of it is just something you can do in your own backyard.
It's true. And, people take for granted your Facebook following or your LinkedIn following. I've done a series of blogs that I've posted on LinkedIn just to help spread the word. And I've got maybe 5,000 followers on LinkedIn. But, I tried TikTok once. I say that as an entry level person here. When I am a Star Trek fan. and I had secured a enterprise model that was done through a Kickstarter campaign, and it was an exact replica of the original enterprise. And I had my wife tape me as I was taking the pieces out of the box, building the enterprise. It took me about 45 minutes to build it, but we put all the pieces together, put the Star Trek music behind it, and had it go fast. It's about a minute, 10 seconds. More than 65,000 people
Wow.
have watched that TikTok. 65,000. And I'm still trying to figure out how I want to put the book to that following, because I know I have 65,000 people who have looked at this,
Hmm.
and how do I tie it back into what I want to do? So you can do it. You know, there's a great quote that I put in my book, not the kids' book, but the other book, and it's a quote from Wayne Gretzky. If you don't take a shot on goal, you'll never make a goal. And, you know, this guy's made more goals than anybody in
Right.
history.
Uh-huh.
And who knows how many shots he's had to take. He's missed at least twice as many as he's made, right?
Sure.
So if we don't take that effort, if I would have never written a children's book, I wouldn't have ever impacted the people who've read the book up to this point. So, you know, is it not hundreds of thousands? No. Will it ever be? Maybe. Who knows? But if I'm able to help just a few people, that's great. Now I just have to take advantage of the marketing opportunities that I can create now.
Sure. And as you mentioned, Book Baby, we provide marketing services. We owe you some. We'll make sure we get that taken care of. Anything else we can do to help you get the book going, we're happy to help.
A lot of tips and resources that I think people take for granted for Book Baby. It's like, all right, I can use them to edit, I can use them to help pull this together and get everything registered. But if you read the blogs and you read the resources that they have, they give you a really good outline for a marketing plan. They give you strategies on how to launch your book. And please, you know, take advantage of it. You know, one of the things too that I did was apply for awards, and I was recognized by the LA Book Festival as a runner-up, and was stunned. It's the first time I've ever written anything, and it started off, you know, the winner, runner-up, and then all the honorable mentions. And I was like, wow, I made it to runner-up status, and that was pretty cool. You just got to do one at a time.
How about that? All right. Well, wrapping up here, Scott, I guess my last question for you, and I know the audience is going to be curious about this as well, is what can we expect from you next? I know you mentioned that you're working on the book with Sarah. Can you speak to where things stand with that, as well as any other projects you have?
Well, the first thing I want to do is complete the larger book, Lessons Learned from Playing Together in the
Sure.
Sandbox. That's got to get done. It's 60,000 words, and we've got to get it trimmed down. And I'd like to get that out next year if possible. But also, as Avery mentioned, is I'd like to get this book, the sequel to this book, out next year as well. Sarah, being the real Sarah, who has cerebral palsy, I've asked her to co-write this book with me. So the outline of the book is done. The narrative with the imagery is done from my perspective. I'm turning that over to her because she's lived that way. And I want her feedback and her advice. So she will be an official co-writer of the book, and hopefully we'll get that book out next year. And then my goal is to maybe write two or three more children's book using some of the kids that are already in the book, give them a name from somebody who inspired me in my life, and find other ways to help kids play nice in the sandbox and inspire them to do good in life. And so we'll have a series of playing together in the sandbox books.
Excellent. Well, like I said, I know the audience is excited. I look forward to hearing more from you as well and reading more from you as well. Scott, before we wrap up, did you have anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just really want to thank Book Baby for the opportunity to do this. I could not have found a better publisher to work with on my first book, and I just want to keep making you all proud as we put this together. But I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to continuing our relationship.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time today to join us here to share such insightful details about your writing process and about your book. It's really been a pleasure, Scott, getting to know you and getting to talk with you a little bit. And to our audience, you can find Scott's book, Playing Together in the Sandbox, for sale on our Book Baby bookshop. It's store.bookbaby.com. So go ahead, swing by, and get your copy today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future videos. For more information on self-publishing your book, visit www.bookbaby.com.